Most women never realize the spell they cast when they go silent, not because they lack voice or power or beauty, but because they underestimate what their stillness does to a man who was never taught how to face the void inside himself. Imagine this. You're a woman who simply stops explaining, stops chasing, stops softening her truth for the comfort of someone else's ego. And then something strange happens. The man who once seemed disinterested, emotionally absent, or not ready, begins to spiral. Not always outwardly, but inside, in places of himself he thought no one could reach. This is not love. This is exposure. You see, when a woman reclaims her energy, when she withdraws the supply, he was unconsciously feeding on her attention, her emotion, her validation. She becomes a mirror he never wanted to look into. And in that reflection, he doesn't just see her. He sees the wounds he buried. The boy inside him who never learned to hold loss. The man who cloaked his shame in conquest. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the parts of the psyche we deny, repress, or reject. But when a woman lives from her deep feminine, not the performative softness, but the raw, rooted knowing, she awakens the shadow simply by existing. She doesn't need to lecture, to punish, to provoke. Her detachment does the alchemy. Her absence speaks the language of his unconscious. Because here's what male psychology rarely admits. Men are not afraid of losing a woman's love. They are afraid of losing the part of themselves that only she reflected. The emotional power a woman holds isn't in how loudly she loves, but in how deeply she sees. And when she withdraws, it's not punishment, it's prophecy. A man who is not ready to meet his own abyss will experience her silence as cruelty, but it is simply the echo of a truth he tried to outrun. If you've ever felt a man slowly unravel after you stop reaching out, you were never imagining it. His mind replays your voice like a ghost. His ego tells him he was always in control, but his body feels the truth differently. Because the body keeps score in the feminine, when she's embodied, not seeking, stirs what years of numbing couldn't keep down. But the tragedy is this. Most women don't trust their power. They confuse detachment with coldness. They feel guilt for withdrawing. They silence their intuition for fear of being seen as too much or too distant. They ask, should I text him? Should I explain? No, not if you've already spoken your truth. Not if silence is now the most honest sound left between you. Understand this. Forbidden male psychology is not just about manipulation or the art of pulling away. It is about awakening. When a man fixates on the woman he cannot reach, it's not always because of her beauty or charm. It's because she activates a longing in him that no performance can satisfy. She becomes a symbol of something lost, and the male psyche is haunted by loss far more than it is fulfilled by gain. She becomes a dream before the fall, the stillness before the reckoning. And that's the paradox. The more a woman stands in her self-possession, the more a man who hasn't done his shadow work will feel displaced. It is not her job to fix that. It is not her task to dim her radiance, so that he doesn't feel burned. The feminine in her must learn to live without apology. Because the truth is, the feminine does not chase. It pulls. It does not demand. It disrupts. And a man who is not anchored in his own masculinity will either run from that power or become obsessed with it. He will call it love. He will confuse her depth with danger. He will try to control it, possess it, define it. But what he's really trying to do is escape himself. And so the silent woman, the one who stopped performing, who stopped fixing, who chose herself, becomes unforgettable. Not because she begged be remembered, but because she allowed him to forget himself long enough to realize what he lost. She became his initiation, his mirror, his undoing. And if you are her, if you've ever felt punished for being whole, or ashamed for being too much, too quiet, too sovereign, know this. You were never too anything. You were simply too rare for a man at war with his own soul. Some women carry storms inside them. Storms that do not rage outward, but stir everything around them into quiet disarray. They speak little, but their presence unsettles the unprepared. Not because they are cruel, but because they are clear. Clarity, for a man who hides behind noise, is more terrifying than rejection. Clarity threatens the masks he's worn, the roles he's played, the illusions he's built to survive. To a man governed by ego, a woman who no longer needs anything from him becomes unbearable. Not because she's hostile, but because she's free. Carl Jung wrote that the feminine archetype is not merely passive. It is the unconscious force that gives shape to meaning. When she detaches, she pulls her energy from his world. His narrative collapses. This is the hidden fear inside many men, that their power was never theirs alone, but a reflection of the woman who believed in them. Once she stops believing, the illusion cracks. The house of cards falls. He may try to replace her quickly, not out of desire, but desperation. He might retreat into distraction, women, work, rage, silence. But nothing scratches the itch she left behind. Because what was lost was not just her, but a version of himself he only accessed through her gaze. She becomes mythic in his mind, not because she was perfect, but because she saw him beyond the persona. And now, without her gaze, he returns to blindness. This is a forbidden truth of male psychology. Validation from a woman he respects carries more weight than applause from the world. And when that validation vanishes, not in anger, but in quiet withdrawal, it triggers a crisis. Not a tantrum, not a rage, but a reckoning. Because now he must face himself without a witness. He must meet his shadow, without her light to balance it. And most men are not prepared for that pilgrimage. Some will fight, some will numb, some will chase, not to love her again, but to reclaim control. Control over the story, over how it ended, over the way she slipped from his grasp, not with fury, but with grace. What the feminine must understand is this. You are not here to be a man's mirror forever. You are not here to constantly reflect what he refuses to see. There comes a moment when your silence becomes your final act of love. Not revenge, not power play. Love. A love that says, I will no longer help you avoid yourself. And that, more than rage, more than tears, is what he remembers. He doesn't remember what you wore, what you texted, or how often you reached out. He remembers the day your voice no longer trembled. He remembers the moment your goodbyes sounded like peace. That is a wound that doesn't bleed, but burns. The woman who understands her own mystery, who cultivates her inner world like sacred ground, becomes a force that both draws and disturbs. She doesn't offer herself as rescue or refuge, but as a mirror. And that mirror, held steady, shows a man exactly where he fractures. Jung called it the anima, the feminine soul within the male unconscious. Every man projects it. Every man searches for it. And when he meets a woman who carries that archetype fully, his psyche ignites. He thinks it's love, but it's more. It's a confrontation with the divine, a face-off with everything he craves but cannot control. And here lies the tension. He is drawn to her mystery but repelled by her independence. He is intoxicated by her allure but terrified of her sovereignty, because she doesn't orbit around his validation. She is her own cosmos. For the woman watching, he may come back, not out of clarity but confusion. He may say he misses you, dreams of you, regrets losing you. But what he mourns most is the version of himself he briefly accessed in your presence. That fragile, fleeting moment where he felt whole because you saw him whole. But do not confuse his pain with transformation. Most men mourn without changing. Most men seek your light, not your truth. And you, woman of shadow and fire, must decide, is his return a reunion or a relapse? Because a man who has not faced his shadow will try to dim yours. A man who has not integrated his anima will worship you and then resent you. He will call you divine until your divinity confronts his wounds. That is not love. That is projection. And you are not born to be a screen for his fantasies. You are a storm, a mirror, a flame. A woman in her shadow feminine doesn't seduce with effort. She reminds a man of something ancient, something he lost in the years of pretending to be whole. She doesn't demand attention. She disrupts comfort. Her silence is not absence. It's initiation. Her gaze does not flatter. It pierces. And when she pulls away, not in anger, but in sacred stillness, it becomes unbearable. Because the man, for the first time, is left with himself. No more distraction. No more validation. No more emotional mothering disguised as love. Just the echo of her absence and the weight of his unprocessed truth. This is what most men never prepare for. The energetic withdrawal of a woman who once gave him light. It's not punishment, it's purification. And yet, to the male ego, it feels like death. Because it is. It is the death of the fantasy. The illusion that he could be adored endlessly without ever having to evolve. The comfort of a woman who made him feel special, without asking him to become real. Jung said, people do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. And when a woman begins to embody her depth, when she stops softening herself to fit into his world, she becomes unbearable not because she's wrong, but because she requires something of him he no longer knows how to give. Depth, honesty, presence, purpose. He may have chased women before, but it was often a chase for approval, control, or escape. But with her, the woman rooted in her own worth, the chase is different. It isn't about conquest. It's about confrontation. Not with her, but with himself. And that's why he obsesses. That's why she lingers in his psyche, like a dream he can't interpret. Because she didn't just touch his skin, she awakened his shadow. She stirred the anima, the feminine force inside him that holds his deepest wounds and wildest potential. She made him feel something that his ego couldn't contain, vulnerability. He may have called her too much. He may have said she was hard to understand. But what he really meant was, she saw too much. And when a woman sees too deeply into a man who is still hiding, he will resent her clarity as if it were cruelty. Because clarity, to an unhealed man, feels like violence. It breaks the spell. And yet, she does not chase. She does not explain her worth. She does not collapse to earn his love back. Because she knows, if love must be earned through shrinking, it is not love, it is survival. And she no longer survives. She chooses. The feminine woman in her shadow power isn't cold. She is consecrated. She has faced her own wounds. She has done her inner excavation. She has met her own shadow. And now, she does not dance with any man who fears hers. She understands that not every man deserves access to her softness. Not every man is ready to receive her fire. Some men want a woman who won't challenge their illusions, a woman who will orbit them without gravity of her own. But she is no longer interested in orbiting. She is a force of center. And so he watches from the sidelines of her life, haunted not by what she did, but by what she didn't do. She didn't beg. She didn't explain. She didn't stay. And that silence, that terrifying, sacred silence, becomes his teacher. It echoes in his thoughts. It crawls into his dreams. It shows up in the faces of the women he tries to replace her with. And nothing feels the same. Because it wasn't just about her. It was about the version of himself he lost when she walked away. That version was fragile, yes. But it was also the closest he ever came to wholeness. To love without armor. To being seen without performance. And now it's gone. Not because she hated him, but because she loved herself more. And that is a lesson his ego was never ready to receive. There comes a moment, often unspoken, when a woman realizes her love will no longer save him. Not because her love wasn't pure, but because he has made a choice to remain a stranger to his own soul. And she, no longer willing to betray herself for breadcrumbs, steps away. Not in rage, not in cruelty, but with the quiet dignity of someone who finally remembered her worth. This is the moment where many men begin their obsession, not with her body, but with her essence, her enigma, her disappearance. Because what the wounded masculine cannot accept is that the feminine is never truly taken. She is only received, and once rejected, once overlooked or misused, she does not return a plead. She recedes like tide from shore, carried with her the moonlight he mistook for his own reflection. Carl Jung understood the torment of projection. The anima, when encountered externally, often becomes the object of divine longing. She is not love for who she is, but for the parts of himself he lost long ago. And when that mirror walks away, the man is left disoriented, not because she was everything, but because through her, he felt everything. And now he feels nothing. He may try to reconnect, not to apologize, but to reattach. He may say all the right words, echo the things she wished he'd said months ago. But the woman who has entered her feminine sovereignty no longer hears with her wounds. She listens with her wholeness. And what once sounded like hope now sounds like echo. Hollow, delayed, too late. Because by the time a man realizes what he had, the woman who embodied it has already become someone else. You see, heartbreak doesn't break her. It forges her. It burns away the parts of her that once clung to potential, to fantasy, to fragments dressed as connection. She stops loving from her need and starts loving from her overflow. And that shift, that is her liberation. Most men are not ready for a woman who loves from fullness. It means they must meet her there. It means they must bring something more than charm, more than strategy. They must bring depth, ownership, presence. They must be willing to descend into their own underworld, not for her, but for themselves, because the feminine no longer carries them through that descent. She watches, she waits, but she no longer leads them where they refuse to go. And this waiting, it is not passive. It is a dance of discernment. She watches not as words, but as energy, not as promises, but as patterns. Because now, she no longer falls for the illusion of change. She waits for the embodiment of it. Her silence, once a space for his comfort, has become a sanctuary for her transformation, and he feels that shift not with his ears, but in his bones. The texts become one-sided. The dreams turn vivid. The new women feel shallow, and the ache grows deeper, not because she vanished, but because she returned to herself. And that, for the man who lived off her energy, is devastating. He may still post, still laugh, still play the role, but underneath it all, something is missing. Her gaze, her grace, her chaos and her calm, the unpredictable rhythm of a woman who feels everything and yet bows to nothing. And the man, he is left in orbit, around a sun that no longer shines for him. This is the essence of forbidden male psychology, desire for what cannot be possessed, obsession with what was once freely given, and the devastation that follows when a woman no longer offers her soul to a man unwilling to meet her in the depths. This is not a fairy tale. It's a reckoning. And the feminine, she is not vengeful. She is vigilant. She rises not to punish, but to protect. Her love, once offered freely, is now sacred, guarded, given not to those who plead, but to those who prepare. And so he watches her rise, not out of reach, but out of resonance. He recognizes her. He remembers her. But he cannot reach her. Not because she's cruel, but because he waited too long to become worthy. And in that realization, where love meets loss, where desire meets distance, his ego finally breaks. And from that breaking, if he's brave enough, the real journey begins. There's a silence that doesn't scream. It echoes, long after her presence is gone, long after her scent has faded from his clothes, and her voice no longer rings through the quiet of his nights. It is a silence that lives in his chest now, a silence that asks questions the ego cannot answer. Why didn't I choose her when I had the chance? Why did I only see her when she was walking away? Why can't I forget the way she looked at me before she stopped looking? He may never say these words aloud, but they pulse beneath the surface. They live in the space between the lovers he entertains and the emptiness he can't name. Because when a woman of depth leaves, she doesn't just leave a man. She leaves an absence he will try to fill with everything that is not her. Jung spoke of the soul's longing for integration, the sacred union of the masculine and the feminine within. And yet, most men try to find this union outside themselves. They chase women who remind them of what they lost in childhood or what they never dared to become. But when a woman becomes her own sanctuary, when she no longer offers her heart to be half-held, she forces the masculine to choose. Will he rise to meet her, or will he fall into the spiral of nostalgia, chasing shadows of the woman he once knew? And nostalgia, for many men, is easier than transformation. It's easier to miss her than to face the reason she left. Easier to remember the curve of her body than the sharpness of her standards. Easier to romanticize the past than to repair the parts of himself that couldn't hold her love when it was pure. But the feminine, she no longer participates in fantasy. She lives in the real, and the real is sacred ground. She's walked through her fire. She's tasted her own tears. She's buried the versions of herself who once begged for love in places that could only offer attention. And now she chooses, not out of scarcity, but out of sovereignty. She does not wait by the phone. She does not analyze the silences. She no longer tries to interpret the unread text or the delayed reply, because she knows if a man is confused about her, he is not yet clear about himself, and she refuses to be a placeholder for a man who is still figuring out his worth. He may think she is distant, aloof, cold, but that's because he never learned how to read energy. Because when she was warm, open, devoted, he doubted, he hesitated. He entertained other women while she became his home. Now that home is closed, and he can't find the key, because it was never a matter of passwords or timing or what-ifs. It was a matter of presence. The masculine has been trained to conquer, to pursue, to win, but no one teaches him what to do with a woman who cannot be won, only met. She is not a prize. She is a portal, and to enter her world is to face everything he has buried. His shame, his fear, his father, his silence. She does not demand he fix these things. She simply triggers them, and that, more than anything, is what haunts him, because in her presence, he felt something rise in him that he did not recognize, but deeply needed. It was not lust. It was not control. It was remembrance of who he could be, of who he might become, of what it would mean to finally love without armor. And that is the power of the shadow feminine. She does not chase. She reflects. She doesn't argue. She exits. And her absence becomes the loudest truth he's ever heard. She was never asking for too much. She was asking him to become. And he wasn't ready. But now he has no choice. Because something in him has changed. Irrevocably. Forever. He will never look at another woman the same. He will never kiss another mouth without tasting regret. He will never hear her name without feeling both longing and loss. And the woman, she walks on, not to forget, but to rise, not to spite, but to choose. She carries his memory not as a wound, but as a reminder of who she once was, of how far she's come, of what she'll never again settle for. She is no longer the woman who waits. She is the woman he will always remember. There's a quiet revolution that happens within a woman when she reclaims her power, not the loud, performative kind that needs to be seen, but the internal shift that whispers, I don't need to be chosen to be whole. And that shift, though invisible to the world, becomes seismic in the soul of any man who once held her and let her go. For him, she was once predictable, available, forgiving, the woman who tried to understand confusion he never had the courage to name, the woman who loved him with softness he mistook for permanence. But when she rises from that chapter, when she no longer identifies with a woman who stayed too long, something in the world goes still. Because now, she carries herself with a kind of detachment that is not bitterness, it is clarity. And clarity is the death of all illusion. He will feel it before he sees it, in the way she no longer replies the same, in the way her laughter doesn't belong to him anymore, in the way her eyes no longer ask, "Do you still love me?" but instead say, "I remember who I am now." This is a heartbreak he never expected, the loss of a woman who finally remembered herself. Jung teaches that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires the death of the false self. And for the feminine, that often begins the moment she stops needing to be needed, when she stops overgiving, when she stops proving, when she stops trying to make herself smaller just to fit inside the fragile masculinity of a man who never knew how to hold her storm. She no longer wants to be adored. She wants to be met. She no longer wants promises. She wants presence. And the man who once saw her as an option now sees her as inevitable, not in possession, but in memory. He cannot reclaim her, because she was never his own. She was a lesson, a mirror, a moment when the universe asked him, "Will you rise or will you run?" And he ran. But he didn't escape, because the kind of woman who triggers your transformation never truly leaves. She lives in the silence between songs, in the pause before sleep, in the ache that has no language, in the laughter of another woman who reminds you, but doesn't replace her. And she has shed skins. She no longer mourns a version of herself that broke for his approval. She holds space for the woman she's become, clear-eyed, rooted, sovereign. She attracts differently now, not from lack, but from overflow, not from longing, but from alignment. And the men who enter her life from this place either meet her in wholeness or exit quickly, unable to withstand her frequency. She is no longer addicted to potential. She is devoted to reality. And reality, in its most sacred form, is this A woman who has done her shadow work, who has walked through fire and came out flame. She no longer begs for love. She embodies it. She becomes a home she once searched for in others. She is not untouched by heartbreak, but transformed by it, because the feminine is not here to be consumed. She is here to awaken, and the men who cannot hold that awakening will call her cold, intense, difficult, but the man who has done his work will call her divine. So let them talk, let them regret, let them spiral in silence, because the woman who has risen from her own ashes no longer fears being alone. She fears being dimmed, and that fear, it protects her. She has made peace with her past. She has alchemized her pain. She walks now not in search, but in sovereignty. And the men who could not meet her then will remember her now. But memory is not reunion. It is reverence. It is the quiet knowing that she was a storm that almost made him real. And she walks on, cloaked in grace, untouchable not because she is cold, but because she is home. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.